Growing up, I've always felt like I was invisible, overshadowed by my younger sister, Lisa. I'm 23, but even as a child, it was clear to me that she was my parents' golden child, their miracle baby who healed the wounds of their past loss. From the very beginning, Lisa was the center of everything. They doted on her endlessly, and I was always the outsider, the one they brushed aside, no matter how hard I tried to make them see me, to make them love me. Lisa, my 8-year-old sister, is pure poison wrapped in a sweet smile. She's a master manipulator, a puppeteer who knows exactly how to twist every situation to her advantage. While everyone else sees her as innocent, I saw through her from the start. She played the victim at every turn, and I was left to clean up the mess she created. My parents couldn't see it. They never could. They would never believe the truth about her, and it broke me. I grew up in a house where every word I said about Lisa was dismissed as jealousy. I tried to explain the cruelty in her eyes, the malice in her actions, but they never understood. They thought she was just a silly little girl, but I knew better. She didn't just play mind games. She tore me apart. One instance I'll never forget: my birthday. I received an antique pocket watch from our grandparents, a gift I treasured deeply. It was a family heirloom, and when Lisa saw it, she wanted it. Of course, I said no. It was my gift. But she didn't take no for an answer. That night, she took it further. She placed a spider in my pillowcase, knowing I was terrified. I woke up to the feeling of something crawling on me, screaming in panic. And Lisa? She acted like she was the caring sister, but behind closed doors, she grinned and told me it was a lesson. A lesson for what? For daring to exist in a world where she was the star. There were more incidents like when I invited my crush over, Mark, only for Lisa to spill juice on me and humiliate me in front of him, then tell him I wasn't worth his time. And yet, my parents, blinded by their adoration of her, brushed off every single complaint. They didn't care how she tormented me, how she intentionally made my life miserable. They just assumed I was the problem. As I got older, I distanced myself. I went to college, got a job in San Francisco, and never looked back. But even from miles away, Lisa's presence haunted me. Every time I came home, she made sure I knew she didn't want me there. She'd ignore me, trash my things, and cause endless friction. My parents didn't see it, no, they never saw it. She was their perfect little angel, and I was just the inconvenient older sister. The worst came when my father had a heart attack. I rushed home, eager to make amends, but Lisa made it clear she didn't want me around. It was when my parents arranged a family vacation that I finally saw how deep her manipulation went. My ticket was mysteriously canceled, and when I confronted Lisa, she wore that familiar, sly smile, knowing exactly what she had done. I tried to tell my parents, but they refused to believe me, dismissing me as jealous. They went without me, without a second thought. And as they enjoyed their vacation without me, I sat at home alone, abandoned yet again. Then the truth came crashing down. My father's medication went missing, and my mother found it hidden in Lisa's room. The mask was finally slipping. When they confronted her, she exploded. She threatened to ruin their lives with false accusations, just like she always did. But it wasn't until she had a violent meltdown that my parents finally saw the truth. Lisa had gone too far. She was arrested, and I thought for the first time that maybe, just maybe, my parents would realize what she had done to me all these years. But it was too late. They had let her get away with everything, while I had suffered in silence. Now they come to me for help, after all the years of favoring Lisa. They're begging for my forgiveness. But how can I forgive them? How can I forget the years of pain they caused me by choosing her over me? This is the story of a family torn apart by favoritism, manipulation, and the devastating consequences of not seeing the truth until it's too late. And the worst part, I'm still trying to figure out if I'll ever be able to forgive them. As children, my life was nothing but a series of relentless betrayals and heart-wrenching disappointments at the hands of Lisa. I was only 8 when I first realized just how far her jealousy could stretch. She didn't just want what I had. She needed it. and she would stop at nothing to make sure I lost it. It started on my 10th birthday, the one day I had hoped to feel special, to feel seen. I had received a beautiful music box from my aunt, a gift that held a sentimental value I couldn't put into words. I cherished it with everything I had until Lisa, with her sickly sweet grin, asked if she could see it. Trusting her, I handed it over. But when I opened it later, I found it shattered, its delicate porcelain pieces scattered like my broken heart. She had crushed it out of sheer spite, and when I confronted her, she acted as though she had no idea how it had happened. My parents? They dismissed it as a silly mistake, a childish accident, and I was left to pick up the pieces literally and figuratively. But that wasn't the only time Lisa's cruelty burned through my soul. There was also the day I invited my classmate, Mark, over to study. I had spent hours preparing, hoping to impress him with my work, to finally feel like I belonged in someone's eyes other than Lisa's shadow. As we sat at the kitchen table, talking and laughing, Lisa couldn't stand it. She barged in, spilled a glass of juice all over my homework, and then had the audacity to act like the innocent one. She started crying, blaming me for the accident, making it look like I was the villain. Mark looked at me, confused and uncomfortable, and I knew. Right then I had lost him. My heart sank into my stomach as he left, but Lisa? She just smirked, pleased with the chaos she created. When I tried to tell my parents what had happened, they rolled their eyes, saying, "Lisa didn't mean it. You know how she is." How was I supposed to explain that this wasn't how she was? This was deliberate. This was hatred. But they would never see it. All of this, every single twisted moment, was brushed off, and I was left to carry the weight of it alone. I would never be good enough for them. My complaints were always dismissed as me being overdramatic, as if I couldn't see how much better Lisa was. She could do no wrong, while I was just the older sister who needed to get over it. It felt like I was drowning in a world where only Lisa's tears mattered, where every wrong was mine, and her cruelty was just childish mischief. But every act of manipulation, every little cut she inflicted, was slowly killing the person I thought I was meant to be. It was as if I was a ghost in my own home, constantly fighting for a place that was never mine. All the while, Lisa basked in their love, in their blind devotion, and I was just forgotten. At 18, I made the decision to leave. College was my escape, my chance to break free from the suffocating weight of my family's favoritism and Lisa's unrelenting cruelty. I packed my bags, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope, and boarded a bus to a new life. I knew I had to distance myself from them, from Lisa, if I was ever going to survive. San Francisco became my sanctuary. I filled my days with studies, work, and the occasional social gathering, keeping the noise of my past at bay. But even in this bustling city, my family's toxic presence never truly left. I thought maybe, just maybe, the distance would make them see me for who I really was, that the years of neglect, the years of being pushed aside, would finally be acknowledged. But no. Every phone call, every text message from my parents was a reminder that Lisa was their golden child. They would gush about her accomplishments, her innocent mistakes, and every little thing she did to earn their admiration. It was as if I never existed in their eyes anymore. Lisa's power over them never waned. She had them wrapped around her finger like a puppet master, pulling strings and playing the part of the perfect daughter. I could barely get a word in when I spoke to them, and any mention of my struggles, my loneliness, my doubts was met with silence or the same hollow reassurance. Lisa's just going through a tough time. We need to focus on her. They couldn't even see that I had been struggling for years, suffocated by Lisa's unrelenting manipulation and their inability to notice. Each conversation left me feeling more isolated, more invisible. My parents had made their choice long ago, and it wasn't me. Lisa was always the center of their world, while I was relegated to the background, a ghost of their past they could barely remember. I began to wonder if I had ever truly been part of that family, or if I had simply been a bystander in a drama where Lisa was the only star. The distance between us grew over the years, first physical, then emotional, until it felt like I was a stranger to them. And yet, even in the silence, I could feel Lisa's presence, like an oppressive weight I couldn't escape. The more I tried to build a life of my own, the more I felt the shadow of her cruelty following me. San Francisco became my refuge, yes, but the ghosts of my past, my family's blind love for Lisa, my own sense of rejection still haunted me. I was never going to be good enough for them, no matter how far I ran. No matter how much I tried to prove my worth, they only saw me as the background noise, a mere inconvenience to Lisa's perfection. When I received the call about Dad's heart attack, a sickening wave of dread and disbelief washed over me. It wasn't supposed to be like this, not after everything. But family is family, no matter how much I had tried to distance myself. I couldn't just let him die without being there. So I packed my bags and rushed back home, praying that this would be the moment things would change. Maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to heal the wounds that had torn us all apart. But, as always, Lisa loomed like a dark cloud, casting a shadow over everything. The family had planned a trip to the mountains to be together, to heal, or at least that's what they told me. I was desperate to believe it would be a fresh start. But when I arrived at the airport, my flight ticket was mysteriously canceled. No explanation. No warning. Just a notification that shattered any hope I had left. I stood there, numb, staring at the screen as the reality sank in. My flight, my opportunity to fix this was gone. And there was only one person who could have done it. Lisa! I could feel the anger burning inside me, like a fire that couldn't be contained. How could she do this? I confronted my parents, my voice shaking with the weight of years of betrayal. But instead of the support I desperately needed, I was met with cold, dismissive stares. It must be a mistake, they said. Are you sure you didn't mix up the dates? They didn't even bat an eye. Lisa had once again managed to twist the situation to her advantage. My suspicions were not unfounded. She had orchestrated this whole thing. I knew her too well by now, her cunning, her ability to manipulate without leaving a trace. And yet, when I tried to expose her, when I tried to make them see the truth, they turned their backs on me. They sided with her once again. It wasn't just the canceled flight, it was the validation of everything I had ever feared. My parents didn't trust me. They couldn't even see through Lisa's lies, no matter how transparent they were. I was the outsider, the troublemaker, the one who had been erased from the family's narrative. I felt invisible again, like I had never mattered in their eyes. And Lisa? She remained untouched, perfect in their eyes, a golden child who could do no wrong. The heartbreak was unbearable. For years, I had lived in the shadows of her manipulation, and now, even in the midst of Dad's health crisis, nothing had changed. The bitter truth hit me harder than any of the lies I'd swallowed before. I would always be the one they abandoned. Always the one they chose to overlook. Lisa had won again. The trip was supposed to bring us all together, to heal the scars that had festered for years. But instead, it quickly unraveled into a nightmare I couldn't escape. It was supposed to be a chance to repair the shattered bond with my family, but the truth, as it always does, came crashing down in the most devastating way. We were gathered in this small cabin, the flickering firelight casting eerie shadows on the walls, when the truth came out. Dad had been growing sicker, weaker by the day, and none of us had any idea why. It wasn't just stress. It wasn't just age. It was something far worse. When I found the bottle of his prescription medication, half empty and hidden away in the back of a cupboard, my stomach sank. I confronted Lisa, and the facade she had carefully maintained for so long cracked wide open. "You did this," I accused, my voice trembling with fury and disbelief. "You've been stealing his medication." Lisa's face twisted into something unrecognizable, her usual calm, composed demeanor replaced with something darker, more sinister. She scoffed at me, trying to play it off, but the guilt in her eyes was undeniable. "You don't know what you're talking about," she hissed, her voice barely above a whisper, as though trying to convince herself as much as me. But I knew. I knew the truth, and it burned in my chest like wildfire. Before I could say another word, she snapped. The fragile mask she had worn for years shattered into pieces, and in its place stood someone I barely recognized, someone dangerous, unhinged. She lunged at me, fists swinging, her eyes wild with rage. In that moment, I saw the girl who had tormented me for so long. The manipulative, jealous sister who had never been satisfied with anything, and she was fighting, screaming like a madwoman. My parents were paralyzed, staring in shock as Lisa's anger spiraled out of control. In the chaos, I was shoved to the ground, her fury overwhelming me. The violence in her movements was too much to handle. It was as if I wasn't even her sister anymore, just some obstacle to destroy. The police were called, and Lisa was arrested, her violent outburst too much for anyone to ignore. The handcuffs that clicked shut around her wrists were a painful reminder of everything we had endured. My parents stood in stunned silence, their eyes wide with disbelief, unable to comprehend what had just unfolded. They were too late, too blinded by their devotion to her to see the monster she had become. But even in the wake of her arrest, I felt no relief. It wasn't just the medication that had been stolen, it was my childhood, my family, everything I ever wanted from them. I could barely even look at them anymore. They were as much a part of the destruction as Lisa had been. The trip had turned into a cruel reminder that no matter what I did, no matter how hard I fought, I would always be the one left behind. And in that moment, I understood something painfully clear. Lisa had won. Again. The final straw came when Lisa's manipulative games reached a level I couldn't ignore any longer. She had always been a master of deception, weaving webs of lies that trapped everyone around her, but this time she had gone too far. I had been warning my parents for years, pleading with them to see her for what she truly was. But they refused to listen. They were blinded by their affection for her, too caught up in the idea of their perfect daughter to see the monster lurking beneath her charming exterior. When we went on a family trip to Europe, it was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to heal the rifts that had torn us apart over the years. But Lisa, in her usual fashion, found a way to ruin everything. The morning of our departure, my parents woke up to find their passports and wallets missing, stolen, vanished without a trace. The panic was instant, but the shock that followed was something far worse. My parents had no idea where to turn, no way to pay for their return flight, and they were stranded in a foreign country, helpless and vulnerable. I knew exactly who was behind it. I had seen the signs, watched her manipulate and torment everyone in her path. It was as if she took a perverse pleasure in watching others suffer for her own gain. My parents, too, seemed paralyzed by her ability to charm them even in the most chaotic situations. But as the hours ticked by and they struggled to find any solution, the truth finally started to sink in. They couldn't deny it anymore. The little girl they had coddled, the perfect daughter they had adored, was capable of the unthinkable. It was in that moment, as they sat there helpless and defeated, that they finally saw her true nature. The veil had been ripped away, and all that remained was a cold, calculating person whose only goal had been to manipulate everyone around her, especially me. I watched as my parents' faces changed from disbelief to raw, aching regret. They finally acknowledged everything I had warned them about, everything I had suffered at her hands for so many years. But it was too late. The damage was done. They had lost their trust in me, had forced me to prove time and again that I wasn't the one they should be afraid of, but Lisa. And now, here we were, stranded in a foreign country, with no one to rely on except each other, and the ugly truth that had finally come to light. Lisa's behavior had escalated beyond anything I could have imagined, and my family, for the first time, realized they had been living in a lie. But the cost of that realization was far greater than any of us could bear. Returning home after the disastrous trip should have been a time to heal, to piece together the fragments of a family that had been torn apart by years of manipulation and deceit. But the moment we stepped through that door, I knew it wasn't over. Lisa's cruelty had only escalated. She was no longer the sweet, innocent girl they had once cherished, she had become a tempest of rage and bitterness. And this time, there was no hiding it. She started showing her true colors again, not just with her usual petty schemes, but with violence. I saw it in the way she stormed through the house, slamming doors, breaking things, anything to show her dominance. Her anger was no longer subtle. It was raw, untamed, and terrifying. I had lived with the fear of her for so long, but this time, it was different. This time, she wasn't just tormenting me, she was threatening our parents. One evening, after a heated argument, Lisa cornered them in the living room. Her eyes, wide with fury, locked onto them as she spat venomous words that made my blood run cold. She threatened to ruin their lives, promising to expose their deepest secrets, to destroy everything they had worked for if they didn't give her what she wanted. And for the first time, I saw the fear in my parents' eyes, the helplessness that I had felt for years. They couldn't control her anymore. She had pushed them to the brink, and they didn't know how to stop her. It was then that the realization hit them like a slap across the face. They had failed, miserably. They had ignored the warnings, overlooked the signs, and allowed Lisa to sink her claws into everything they held dear. But now it was too late to pretend anymore. The damage was done, and it was unbearable. I had warned them for years that Lisa was capable of destroying us all, and now they were finally starting to see it. In the end, there was only one choice left. The family was no longer a family, it was a battlefield. The decision to take legal action and evict Lisa wasn't taken lightly, but it was the only way to ensure our safety, to regain control of our lives. And so, with heavy hearts, we began the painful process of forcing her out. But even as the legal papers were signed, and the walls of our home were lined with the echoes of this tragic final chapter, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. The family I had once longed to belong to was no more replaced by a shell of what it used to be, a hollow version of love and trust, forever shattered by a sister who had never been who she seemed. After everything that had happened, after the years of neglect, the constant lies, the manipulation, it felt like a cruel joke when my parents finally admitted their mistakes. There, in the living room, sitting across from me with eyes full of regret, they finally acknowledged the truth I had been screaming to them for so long. They had favored Lisa, ignored my pain, and allowed her toxic behavior to destroy our family. I could see the weight of their realization sinking in, crushing them. My father, usually so stoic, wiped away the remnants of tears from his eyes. My mother's face was pale, strained with guilt, as if every wrinkle on her face had been etched there by the years of mistakes they had made. It was like watching two strangers, people I had once believed would always protect me, now trembling in the ruins of their own choices. And there was no comfort for them in this moment. They had allowed Lisa's charm to blind them, turning a blind eye to everything I had suffered, dismissing it as nothing more than sibling rivalry or my overreaction. But the truth was undeniable now. They had been complicit. But as much as their apologies burned like acid on an open wound, I wasn't sure I could find forgiveness. How could I? The years of pain, the betrayal, the neglect, it had all piled up in my chest, leaving behind a hollow ache I wasn't sure could be healed by mere words. Still, a small part of me wanted to believe, wanted to hope that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild something from the ashes of what had been lost. So I listened, gritting my teeth, trying to swallow the hurt, and nodded. What struck me next was that they were not only acknowledging their favoritism, but were beginning to consider something that had never been a part of their narrative: Lisa's mental health. They had always dismissed my concerns, labeled them as exaggerated or unimportant. But now they were talking about therapy, about possible issues beneath her actions. It was as if a veil had lifted for them, and they were seeing Lisa for who she truly was: someone in desperate need of help, someone whose behavior had spiraled out of control in ways no one had ever addressed. It wasn't an easy conversation. It didn't undo the years of torment I had lived through. But there was a glimmer of hope now, a seed planted that maybe, just maybe, our family could begin to heal. Still, the road ahead was uncertain. Lisa's actions had left deep scars, and rebuilding wasn't going to be easy. But for the first time in a long while, I could sense that there was room for change, room for growth. The question was, would Lisa embrace it? Or had she already fallen too far down a path from which there was no return? After everything we had been through, after all the trauma, I found myself standing at a crossroads, torn between my desire to help my parents and the overwhelming fear of letting Lisa back into my life. I couldn't deny that they were struggling, that they needed me, my mother's tearful calls, my father's shaky voice when he spoke about the constant tension. It all cut through me like a blade. Despite everything, I loved them. They were still my parents, and I wanted to help them pick up the pieces of the wreckage Lisa had left in her wake. But the truth was, I was terrified. Terrified of what might happen if I let my guard down. Lisa's violent tendencies hadn't disappeared. If anything, they seemed to be growing more unpredictable, more volatile with every passing day. I had seen firsthand how quickly she could flip from calm to explosive, how she could tear apart everything in her path without a second thought. I couldn't forget the times she had thrown things, screamed, threatened us. I couldn't forget the sickening rush of adrenaline that would flood my veins every time I had to brace for her next outburst, never knowing what would set her off. My parents seemed convinced that she could change, that this was just a phase, something that could be fixed with the right therapy, with the right guidance. But I wasn't so sure. Not after everything that had happened. I had learned to trust my instincts, and they screamed at me to stay cautious, to keep my distance. Lisa had hurt me in ways that were deeper than anything I could explain, and the fear of being her next target kept me awake at night. The thought of her unleashing that fury on me again was a weight I couldn't carry. It was like I was stuck in a never-ending loop, pulled between my love for my family and the visceral, gut-wrenching knowledge that getting too close to Lisa again could destroy everything. So, as I stepped forward to help my parents, I did so with a heart full of uncertainty. I would support them. I would help them find the strength to navigate this nightmare. But I couldn't let Lisa back in, not yet. Not when I knew how easily she could turn everything upside down. As much as I wanted to believe things could be different, the scars she had left on me were still too fresh, too raw. Trust, once broken, was not something I could easily rebuild. The days ahead would be filled with tension. I knew it. But at least for now, I was making the choice to protect myself, even if it meant walking this lonely path alone. I couldn't risk being swallowed whole by Lisa's chaos again, not when I had just begun to find my own footing.